I never thought I'd be sitting in a courtroom at 63, watching my own daughter try to have me declared mentally incompetent. But there I was, listening to Chloe tell a judge that I couldn't remember my own name half the time, that I'd been leaving the stove on and forgetting to pay bills. Every word was a lie, delivered with the kind of practiced concern that only comes from years of manipulation. The whole thing started 3 months earlier with something as simple as a security alert on my home system. At 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a notification that someone was probing my network. Not trying to break in, just testing the defenses. As a former NSA cybersecurity specialist, I knew this wasn't random. Someone was mapping my digital footprint, and they were good at it. I'd spent 30 years protecting national security infrastructure, retiring only when my arthritis made the long hours unbearable. My little house in suburban Virginia was my fortress, equipped with security systems I'd designed myself. So, when someone started poking around my network, I paid attention. The next morning brought worse news. A certified letter from a mortgage company informed me that a reverse mortgage had been taken out on my house. $500,000, with my signature on the documents. Except I'd never signed anything, never even spoken to these people. The signature was perfect, though. Better than most forgeries I'd seen in my government work. When Chloe showed up that afternoon, I was ready. I'd installed a small recording device in the living room and had the mortgage documents spread across my coffee table. She walked in without knocking, as always, her designer heels clicking against my hardwood floors. She looked tired, older than her 30 years. Her relationship with Julian had aged her, though she'd never admit it. He was one of those smooth-talking tech entrepreneurs who seemed to have money but no visible source of income. I'd run a background check on him months ago, finding a trail of failed startups and suspicious business partnerships. Chloe glanced at the papers on my table, and something flickered across her face. Not surprise, exactly. More like resignation. I held up the mortgage documents. She didn't ask what they were. Instead, she launched into what I now recognize as a well-rehearsed speech about my declining mental health, how I'd been forgetting things, repeating stories, leaving lights on all night, how she was worried about me living alone in such a big house. When I mentioned the forged signature, she didn't deny it. She just looked at me with this mixture of pity and frustration and said I probably signed it and forgot, that I'd been having memory issues for months, calling her at odd hours, asking the same questions, over and over. None of it was true, but she said it with such conviction that for a moment I wondered if I was losing my mind. Then she said the words that changed everything. "Mom, you owe me this house. You owe me this life. You were never really here when I was growing up. Always working, always traveling, always putting your precious national security before your own daughter. This is the least you can do." She picked up the framed photo of us from her high school graduation, the one where she's smiling and I'm standing slightly apart, still in my work clothes because I'd rushed from a classified briefing. She looked at it for a long moment, then let it slip from her fingers. The glass shattered against my coffee table. That's when I knew she was lost to me. Later that evening, I called Marcus, my former partner at the agency. Without going into details, I asked him to trace the shell company listed on the mortgage documents. Apex Innovations LLC, registered 3 months ago in Delaware. Marcus called back within hours. The company was registered under Julian's name, and he was already on the FBI's radar for suspected money laundering through various tech ventures. What looked like a family dispute was actually part of a larger criminal enterprise. The next week brought a court summons. Chloe, represented by Julian's lawyer, was petitioning for full guardianship over me. The documents painted a picture of a paranoid, declining woman who couldn't manage her own affairs. They'd somehow gotten statements from neighbors claiming I'd been acting strangely, talking about government conspiracies and imaginary threats. I recognized the tactics immediately. This was psychological warfare, and they were good at it. Julian escalated things quickly. People started showing up at my house, claiming to be from various service companies. One tried to get into my basement, saying he needed to check the electrical system. Another wanted to inspect my internet connection. I caught them all on camera and sent them away. But the message was clear. They were trying to plant surveillance equipment, probably looking for more personal information they could use against me. The isolation campaign began next. My few remaining friends started getting calls from Chloe, expressing concern about my mental state. A local blog published an anonymous piece about a former government official in our area who was struggling with paranoid delusions. The details were vague enough to avoid libel, but specific enough that anyone who knew me would recognize the description. I found myself completely alone, which was exactly what they wanted. That's when I hired David Chen, a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse cases. He was skeptical at first, the way lawyers get when a story sounds too complicated to be true. But when I showed him the technical analysis of the cyber probing, the forensic breakdown of the forged signature, and the connections between Julian's shell company and the mortgage fraud, his entire demeanor changed. David understood that we weren't just fighting a custody case. We were fighting a criminal conspiracy. Meanwhile, Marcus was digging deeper into Julian's background. What he found was worse than I'd imagined. Julian wasn't just laundering money. He was using Chloe to access information about my former work, specifically details about vulnerabilities in financial systems that I'd helped secure years ago. He was planning something much bigger than stealing my house. My daughter hadn't just betrayed me for money. She'd become a tool for someone planning to attack the very systems I'd spent my career protecting. The weeks before the custody hearing were the darkest of my life. I'd survived 3 decades in national security, dealt with threats from foreign governments and terrorist organizations, but nothing had prepared me for this kind of betrayal. Every morning I woke up wondering if today would be the day they succeeded in having me declared incompetent. But I wasn't the same woman who used to come home exhausted from classified briefings. I wasn't the mother who missed school plays because of crisis meetings. I was someone who'd learned to fight dirty when necessary, and I was done being a victim. David and I developed a 2-pronged strategy. On the legal front, we'd systematically dismantle every lie in their petition. On the criminal front, I compiled everything Marcus and I had discovered about Julian's operation and sent it to a contact at the FBI, with instructions to move only when I gave them the signal. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late September. I arrived early, wearing the same Navy suit I'd worn to congressional hearings, projecting the kind of calm competence that had served me well in my government career. Chloe looked nervous, fidgeting with her jewelry and avoiding eye contact. Julian sat behind her, radiating the kind of false confidence that came from believing his own lies. Their lawyer was smooth and well-prepared. Exactly what I'd expected. The first hour went badly for us. Their lawyer painted a vivid picture of my supposed decline, complete with testimony from neighbors who claimed I'd been acting erratically. Chloe took the stand and delivered an Oscar-worthy performance as the concerned daughter, describing late-night phone calls where I'd rambled about conspiracies and threats that didn't exist. When David stood up to cross-examine her, I could see the doubt in the judge's eyes. We were losing. That's when David asked Chloe about the reverse mortgage. She maintained that I must have signed it during one of my confused episodes, that she was only trying to help me manage my finances. David then asked about Julian's business ventures. Their lawyer objected, claiming irrelevance. But the judge allowed the question. Chloe claimed she didn't know much about Julian's work, just that he was successful in tech. Then David played the recording from that afternoon 3 months ago, when Chloe had told me I owed her everything. Her voice filled the courtroom, cold and calculating. Nothing like the concerned daughter she'd been pretending to be. The judge's expression changed. David followed up with the forensic analysis of the forged signature and the technical breakdown of the cyber attacks on my system. He presented evidence of Julian's shell companies and their connections to the mortgage fraud. Finally, he showed security footage of Julian's associates, trying to plant surveillance equipment in my house. When it was my turn to testify, I didn't try to defend myself against their accusations. Instead, I looked directly at the judge and said, "Your Honor, I've spent 30 years identifying threats to national security. I taught my daughter how to recognize danger, but I never taught her what to do when the danger was sleeping in her bed." Then I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message. Now, the courtroom doors opened, and FBI agents walked in. They approached Julian and Chloe's table with federal arrest warrants for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit cybercrimes against financial institutions. Julian tried to run. He made it about 6 feet before an agent tackled him to the courtroom floor. Chloe just sat there, staring at me with a mixture of shock and hatred that I'd never seen before. When they put the handcuffs on her, she finally spoke. "You could have just given me the house." I looked at her, this stranger, who used to be my daughter, and said, "I would have given you anything except the right to destroy me." The story made national news within hours. The former NSA specialist who'd uncovered a cyber crime ring by refusing to be declared incompetent. The headlines wrote themselves. All charges against me were dropped. Obviously. My house, my assets, my reputation were all restored. But the real victory was smaller and more personal than the news story suggested. 3 months later, I converted my home office into a consultation room. I started offering free cybersecurity advice to elderly people who'd been targeted by similar scams. It turns out that financial predators love targeting former government employees, thinking we might have valuable information or retirement accounts worth stealing. My first client was Mrs. Patterson from down the street, whose grandson had somehow gained access to her bank accounts. My second was a retired Air Force colonel whose nephew was trying to get power of attorney through forged documents. I discovered that my 30 years of government service had prepared me for this second career in ways I'd never expected. I knew how to investigate, how to document evidence, how to build cases that would hold up in court. More importantly, I knew how to recognize the signs of family abuse before it escalated to criminal fraud. The work gave me something I'd been missing since retirement: a sense of purpose. Every case I solved, every family predator I exposed, every elderly person I helped protect, felt like a small victory against the forces that had tried to destroy me. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from the Women's Correctional Facility where Chloe was serving her sentence. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope. I held it for a long time, thinking about the little girl who used to wait up for me when I came home from business trips, who used to proudly tell her friends that her mom worked for the government, wondering when that love had turned to resentment, when that resentment had turned to greed, when that greed had made her vulnerable to someone like Julian. Then I put the letter through my paper shredder without opening it. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. I'd spent too many years of my life trying to earn love from people who saw me only as a source of money or status or access. I was done with that version of myself. These days I wake up early and review case files over coffee. I spend my mornings teaching cybersecurity workshops at the senior center, my afternoons consulting with families who've been targeted by financial predators, and my evenings reading books I never had time for during my government career. My house is quieter now, but it's a peaceful quiet instead of a lonely one. I've made friends with other retired women who value competence over sentiment, who understand that some relationships aren't worth preserving. Last week, I helped expose a home health aide who was stealing from her elderly clients. Next month, I'm testifying in a case involving a man who convinced his elderly father to sign over his farm. The FBI still calls me occasionally when they need help with cases involving financial crimes against seniors. I never married, never had other children, never built the kind of traditional family that's supposed to take care of you in your old age. For years, that felt like a failure, something I needed to compensate for by being the perfect mother to Chloe. Now, I understand that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about people who see your value, who respect your boundaries, who would never try to steal your life savings, or have you declared mentally incompetent for their own financial gain. I found my real family in the community I've built around my work, in the elderly clients who trust me with their stories, in the other professionals who collaborate with me on cases, in the women at the senior center who've become genuine friends. Sometimes I think about the woman I used to be, always apologizing for working late, always trying to make up for missed dinners and school events, always believing that love meant sacrificing yourself for other people's happiness. That woman would have signed over the house. She would have believed Chloe's lies about memory problems and declining mental health. She would have spent her golden years in some assisted living facility, convinced that she deserved whatever scraps of affection her daughter was willing to throw her way. I'm grateful that woman is gone. The real tragedy isn't that I lost my daughter. The real tragedy is that it took me 63 years to learn that some people will only love you as much as they can use you, and that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. But I learned it eventually, and that's what matters. I learned to build walls where I needed them, to say no without explanation, to value my own peace over other people's approval. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst instincts, even if that someone is your own child. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to start over, to build a life based on your own values, instead of other people's expectations. These days, when I lock my doors at night, I'm not locking out threats. I'm protecting something precious, a life I've finally learned to live on my own terms.